Okay, last week we began talking about investing in our mind, that if we teach ourselves to think positively, we have full control over the way we think, then we will have a positive outcome and we'll start seeing things positively. This week, we're going to be talking about a different topic. The topic is to discover this spiritual awareness. So we're talking about last week we spoke about how we can take our cognitive, our mental state of mind, our understanding and the way we think and influence our bodies. Now we want to talk about how can I influence my mind? How can I influence my way of thinking? Okay. Now it's very nice that we learned last week that our minds can control our feelings and our emotions, and our mind will influence our emotions. But how do we influence our mind? Right? So we have to discover a new track, almost like a new channel where we want to live in, where this is like a spiritual awareness track, where the things we see, the things we learn are all going to be spiritual influences for us. So tonight's course is really targeting how we can start seeing the world in a more godly and a more spiritual way. So there's a lot of ideas here, a lot of tools, a lot of teachings, and it's going to be, it's almost like a lifelong concept to try to start seeing the world in this spiritual view. But personally, I think this is an amazing concept. Some of the concepts you're going to think in your head like, oh, I know that, that's beautiful. But the awareness part, the part of being self-reflective on these concepts is the parts that we really want to focus on. Okay. So we're on the student book, we're on page 38. If we open up to page 38, you'll see it begins with an exercise. The exercise 2.1 is how would you define spirituality? And how might spirituality be experienced? If you want, you can unmute and share what you think. If you can define spirituality, spirituality could be godliness, it could be religion, it could also be art, the sunset. Many people might have different ways of describing spirituality. Then experiencing spirituality. It could be going to services, could be high holidays. For some people, gefilte fish will bring them back to this spiritual memory. For others, it might be giving charity will give them this spiritual experience, right? So for every person, spirituality can mean something very, very different. So if you look on the screen, we have here that there is a default consciousness that every single person has. This is the way God designed us to be. This is the way our bodies are. Our bodily senses, tangible things, right? We're aware of these things. Like we spoke about before, a shirt that a person's wearing, a car someone's driving, right? You can't not notice if it's a nice car or what we call a jalapa, right? A real old car. If a person is famous or a person is a rabbi, these are things that we just notice all the time. And then there's more personal things, like for myself, right? The clothing that I'm going to wear. When I'm shopping, we look at the price tag. We see what am I going to look like? We look at the brands in these things, right? So this is our default consciousness, is to consciously think of things for our bodily needs, our physical things that we need. So if this is the things we need, right? Quality food, quality clothing, then the society we live in, the people we surround ourselves with, are going to automatically emphasize on the material gain. So the more clothing you have, the nicer clothing you have, the nicer house, so on and so forth, the material stuff will always be the emphasis. So naturally, our default conscious will tell us the more money in the bank you have, the happier you will be. We all know that ultimately, that doesn't really play out in real life. But people younger than us, children, or sometimes even adults, still believe that if this amount of money didn't make me happy, then more money will make me happy, right? And they always have this desire to have more material wealth, thinking that the more material wealth will bring me greater happiness. So this is the way God created us to be. There's nothing really we can do to change this if we just want to live in the default setting that we were created with. So a child is born and they naturally know that they have to eat, they have to get dressed, they have to have a roof over their head. These are natural things that we have to have. The unnatural stuff is to dig deeper and to find the spirituality that is also surrounded in our life. But for that, it's not our default anymore. We have to go looking for it. And that's our job. So today what we're going to try to do is differentiate with our bodily needs and our soul needs, so we can actually realize on our own and come to our own recognition that our needs, we also have spiritual needs. Our needs are not only material needs, but we also have spiritual needs. And as we recognize that we have a spiritual need, we're going to start wanting spiritual gain. And that spiritual gain will bring to our life much peace and happiness, which is really what we want. So, in order to help us understand this, on page 39, there's an exercise that says, record as many words as possible to accurately describe you. So if you have a pen, you can do that. If you want to do this in your mind, you can do that. Try to figure out how you can use words to describe yourself. So I think naturally we describe ourselves as a teacher, a doctor, a scientist, a friendly neighbor, right? We're describing attributes about ourselves. Either things that we want to do, things that we've accomplished throughout our life. So this is back to saying, we're talking about the shirts that we wear, right? These are the different hats that we wear. But describe you as in, who is the real you? And there's an interesting story where that Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, so he writes the story that when he was a child, his mother died when he was very young, and his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, he took the responsibility to educate his grandson. And his grandson was playing in his room, and he calls his grandson over and he sits him on his lap, and he says in Yiddish, Avu Zayda, where is Grandpa? And he points to his beard, because a child sitting on the lap grabs the beard. He says, no, this is Zayda's beard. So he points to his nose. He says, no, that's Zayda's nose. It goes through the shoulders, the head, And then the kid runs off and goes out, leaves the room, and comes out a few minutes later, comes running back into the room, pointing to his grandfather. Oh, there you are, there you are. So the story that Tzemach Tzedek writes was that his grandfather was trying to teach him something very important. That yes, I'm not my nose, my ears, my eyes. These are features that we have. But the real you is something different. So what's this real you that we're talking about here? So text 1 on page 40, we have a verse from Genesis that tells us clearly who we are. It says, Vayitze Hashem Elokim es ha'adam afer min ha'adama vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. God formed the human from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into the human's nostrils the soul of life. This is how the verse describes God creating human beings. Why is this verse so significant? So if you look at the screen, we'll see the difference between how we were created and the four-legged creatures were created. So in general, there are 4 different levels of creation in the world. There is man, there are animals, both have life. Man has life in additional to animals, we also have free choice, which is how we're differentiated from the animals. Animals do not have free choice. Then you have vegetation and plantation. That's a third level where it has some sort of life and growth. It could die, plants die, trees die. And then you have the inanimate objects that exist, but we don't see that it actually has life. But it has to have some sort of life, otherwise it wouldn't even exist. So an animal is created as a body and a soul. The verse tells us here that a human is created different. Human had a body formed, and then a soul was breathed into this body. What makes this different is that the body, the animal, is one body and soul. The body and soul is one. So that's when a person behaves as a single consciousness, we call him an animal. You know, that reference when we yell at someone and say, you're acting like an animal, because he's acting as a single conscious person. A human being has dual conscious. Dual conscious means that we have a soul in a body. And our soul and our body are two separate things that God paired together, created this marriage, and we're inseparable. There's nothing we can do that will separate the soul and the body for death. And we don't want that. Hold on. Snooze. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if you hear me. Okay. So this is just for us to get started, understanding that we're created in this very, very specific way. Take a look at text 2 to understand more about the soul. What is the soul?
How do we get a soul if we don't have it breathed into us?
Animals are created with the soul when they're born.
No, Adam had his soul breathed into him.
Uh-huh.
We don't have that. How do we get it?
Oh, how did? It's a good question. So you're asking how is our soul breathed into us today?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. So first of all, we're being recreated. We're not created from nothing to something. We're created from something, even though it's still miraculous how it's done. It's from something. So there is a certain level of an iota of what happened to Adam that we still get till today. That's number one. Number two, it says that that when 40 days after a woman conceives, a soul is given to her. Until then, in other words, there's no soul. I think that's when the body starts getting more forms, less fluid, something like that. So there is a concept where a soul, and there's a second concept where a Jew versus a non-Jew has something called a godly soul. And the godly soul is not given to us until our bar or bat mitzvah. So when a girl is 12 and a boy is 13, that's when their Jewish soul, their godly soul is sort of breathed into them.
What if you don't have a bas mitzvah or bar mitzvah?
It's a good question. So naturally, on your 12th Hebrew birthday, that soul enters your body. So bat mitzvah means you are now responsible to keep the Torah and mitzvahs. Whether you're aware of it or not, you automatically get that responsibility. So the concept of having a bar or bat mitzvah when a person is as an adult, it's almost like renewing their vows, right? It's like reminding myself, like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about all these responsibilities I had. So I want to promote myself to do that. So we just make another ceremony to promote having those responsibilities. But in essence, the soul came when a person became bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. And interesting, when a person converts to Judaism, the day that they convert is called their Hebrew birthday. And the reason for that is because that's the day that their Jewish soul enters their body. Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. In the laws of inheritance, a convert doesn't if they have let's say children that would inherit them, for example, if the children are, let's say a person as an adult converts, and before the conversion, they had children from a previous marriage, and their children are not Jewish. So according to Torah law, when they convert, their children don't inherit them anymore. So it's almost like the same body, but with a new soul, right? So this is the concept of a new soul. I'm just explaining these ideas so you understand that the soul is a very, very real thing. In tech,
Can I
sorry,
say something? Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead.
The written words here say God formed human from the dust of the ground. So
Mhm.
when a new human being is formed today, now, since the beginning of time, are we not formed from the dust of the ground of today? And God breathes into us our soul. So it wasn't just at the very, very beginning, it's at the beginning of each life.
It's a good point what you're saying. Although we don't see today that a child is born from in our backyard, you know.
It
Doesn't
is
just-
though,
It
because
is, in essence, it is,
we,
right.
we come from the earth and the mother's food and all the nutrients. It's all from the same source that it's always been.
Right, that's true. So when you break it down like that, ultimately that's where that's where everything will back up to. It's true. Very true. Ultimately, everything comes from the ground. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Now let's look at text 2 on page 40. So this is part of the morning blessings that we say. It's in our prayer book. It's we say, Elikai neshama shenasatabi tahirahi, my God, the soul that you placed within me is pure. You created it, you formed it, and you breathed it into me. So here we describe how this soul is not just the soul that God breathed into me, but this is something that is so pure and so precious. So earlier, when we spoke about what spirituality might be, we mentioned that spirituality could be sunset or art, things of this nature, right? Things of creative concepts. Now we're trying to describe a deeper concept in spirituality. The deeper concept of spirituality here would be more than just searching for meaning or identifying our soul or accomplishing something. Maybe in the secular world, the concept of spirituality is anything that I do for someone else. We have a certain sense of spirituality. It's not selfish, so it's selfless. So it kind of falls into the ballpark of spirituality. If I'm helping the poor people in a third world country, I'm a spiritual person. If I'm visiting someone in the hospital, I'm a spiritual person, right? We kind of package all these good deeds that we do in a spiritual person. Here we're trying to say that our soul is something very, very, very deep, much deeper than this stuff. And tonight we want to try to go into that depth and try to understand, what is the soul? What is it? So trying to figure this out, look at text 3. Text 3, the verse tells us directly what our soul is comprised of. And the verse says the human soul is the candle of God. Human soul is the candle of God. Anyone know how they would understand this verse? In which way can you imagine a flame serving as a metaphor for the human soul? Anybody want to share?
Well, everything comes from the sun. Everything grows because of the sun. And we're here because of the sun. The whole planet is here because of the sun. So that's the light, that makes everything possible.
Right, that's very nice, very interesting. the sun wouldn't come up, we would have a problem. Or if it would be too bright, we would have another problem.
Mhm.
That's very interesting.
And so ultimately that the light from the candle really came from it's the energy of the sun coming through that candle, which to me is God. You know, God
Right.
represents, or the light represents God and what makes everything possible,
The energy.
the energy.
Mhm. That's how you would go full circle, that the human soul is the candle of God, that the human soul carries that, brings
Yes,
everything, that all the energy the sun is bringing into the world, the human is turning it into something greater.
well, it's turning into a human.
Yeah,
That yes, because of that light, we are possible.
right, very interesting. I like that, thank you. In text 4, we'll see here on page 42, where the Alter Rebbe and the Tanya describes what this candle, his way of explaining the flame that flickers. Now, this is a verse and many ways of understanding it, and everyone's way is correct. As we say in the studying of the Talmud, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, that both sides, but every opinion is the right opinion. There's no such thing of a wrong opinion in this case. But now we're going to read what the Alter Rebbe's approach on this verse is. Marilyn, would you like to read first?
Sure. The nature of a flame. Oh, wait.
Yeah, the
Oh,
nature of the
okay.
flame.
The nature of a flame is to flicker upward, indicating that the flame intrinsically seeks to part from its wick in order to unite with its source above. Similarly, the human soul naturally desires and yearns to separate itself and escape its body in order to unite with its origin and source in God, the blessed source of all life.
Thank you. So the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, is describing here that in a very simple manner, if you look at a flame, you look at a match, look at the candle on the screen, the flame is yearning to go up. You turn a candle this way, that way, the flame will always go up. As long as it has something to hold down to, it's grounded. So the flame is like the soul, what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The soul just wants to go back up to the source, or just wants to go to heaven. The soul wants to go back up to God and serve God in a different world. It doesn't want the material world. The same way as the flame in a candle. The flame doesn't really care much about what it's doing down here. It wants to go up. Even though the flame is aware that the moment it leaves the wick, it's going to die, doesn't care. We'd rather die and go back up to its source than be down here in this world. There's the famous story where the Rebbe asked someone once what this candle was. And the guy says, it's a simple question. It's a candle. So the Rebbe said, it's not a candle. It's a lump of wax with a wick in the middle of the lump of wax. Doesn't become a candle until you light the flame. Then it becomes a candle. The Rebbe was saying, same concept is with our body and our soul, right? We have a soul, we have a body. But if we don't use our soul properly, then perhaps, the Rebbe didn't explain this, but perhaps the Rebbe is saying we're just a lump of clay. You're not a person, you're not a human being. Human being is someone that has a soul and utilizes their soul for the right thing, right? But let's not divert off topic here. So the concept here is that our body, like we mentioned earlier, the default consciousness of our body is our materialistic world, is the mundane. But God also gave us this Ner Havaya Nishmas Adam. God gave us this soul. The soul we're using as a description is this flame. And our soul is yearning to go up to heaven. In other words, it's yearning to serve God, to serve a greater cause, a greater purpose. our soul is yearning for something spiritual, right? And we have to try to figure out how could we be conscious of what my soul's needs are, right? A regular day, we wake up and we think, what's my needs? My needs for my body, my needs for my family. What do I need for the house? What do I need to keep myself in a safe place, right? These are all our materialistic consciousness, which is very important. But God gave us, besides our body, a soul as well. And this soul also needs fuel, also needs oil. We need to feed it. So let's understand, what does the soul need and how can we nurture the soul? So this is the awareness where we recognize that we have within us the soul. And when we concentrate that this soul is a soul that has zero needs for any materialistic needs, doesn't want anything. It's just yearning for spirituality. And we can give it spirituality. That is something very, very rewarding.
Would that spirituality be love?
Spirituality could be love. In a friendship, the spirituality of a friendship is love. In our serving Hashem, the reason why we serve God, in other words, the reason why we study Torah and we observe mitzvahs, the reason for it is to express our love to God, right? So love is a spiritual concept. It's not something we can it's not tangible, not something we can hang up on the wall. So love is a very spiritual thing if it's used in the right way. If it's used for spirituality. I'm going to play for you a meditation with Rabbi Wolf. So if the volume is not loud, you can't hear it, let me know. Hopefully I did all the settings correctly where you'll be able to hear the video this week.
We have two voices speaking to us from within. One voice is our lower order self, Nefesh Bahamis. The Nefesh Bahamis urges us to live a life of pleasure, of ease, getting what we want whenever we want it. The other voice is the voice of the Nefesh Elokis. That's our godly self. That's the self that seeks connectedness with people in love, connectedness with the world and its elements, feeling fulfilled, connectedness with Hashem. Gently close your eyes and just become aware of your inner self, your inner quiet, that place you can escape to, because it's always a place where you have your own sense of self. Allow that special place to be your refuge, that place of inner sanctity, totally protected, always safe. As you step out of that space, become aware of your two inner voices. Listen to the voice of the Nefesh Bahamis. Note what it tells you. It says, you're insecure in this world. You need to shore yourself up. You need more and more and more. Otherwise, you're unsafe. Build walls around you. wealth, create superficial pleasures because life is short. That Nefesh Bahamis is the voice of the ego. Now listen to the truer voice of the Nefesh Elokis, the voice that tells you that everything possesses truth and meaning, that your happiness and joy comes from connecting truly to people, to the world around you, by connecting to the inner selves, the soulful center. The voice that tells you pleasure doesn't come from material acquisition. It comes from the smile of appreciation for having helped someone, for the small gift that you give your grandchild, for the blue sky that you wake up to. In life, choose which voice you are going to listen to. It may be that you don't need to have a battle within, a fight between them. You might even be able to transform the Nefesh Bahamis into an ally, giving its energy the capacity to do the right things. But always allow yourself to recognize that your true voice is the voice of the Nefesh Elokis. In so doing, your life will be replete with happiness and fulfillment.
Okay. So this is the recognizing that we have the godly soul, we have this spirituality, and taking advantage of what we have. So how do we jump into this world of spirituality, right? It's not something we see, it's not something we have a relationship with, it's something where we all of us are challenged with getting closer to something that we can't get close to, which is spirituality. The closer we get, the farther we feel we are. It's a very difficult concept. So Chassidus has this idea of we go through it through subtraction. The concept here is, since our inner spiritual voice is silenced, spirituality is the sum of subtraction, which takes us to the concept of meditation. This is a concept that was practiced by the greatest sages of all times in every generation. They called this hispoididus, where they would go out to a place where there was no distractions. And the further away they can go from distractions, from the mundane, from the day-to-day grind, that's where they would find their spirituality moment. So if they went out in the fields, if they went out deep in the forest, we have many, many stories of the Baal Shem Tov would go into the forest for days and he would meditate. What's the concept of going away? Why can't you just sit in bed and meditate, or sit at your kitchen table and meditate? The reason is because in order to bring out that silence, you have to go to a place where there is silence. Our eyes and ears are open to all the mundane and material around us, because that's what we said our default conscious is, so that we always see our default and the needs that are right in front of us. So the farther we can go away from this mundane, the materialistic world, the easier it is for us to connect with spirituality. So this is the general concept. In text 5, he tells us a little bit more about what hispoididus is. Jonathan, you want to read for us page 43?
Yes. The ideal practice. His Bodhidut seclusion is one of the most superior of all the distinguished practices. It is the practice of the greatest saints and the medium through which the prophets experience revelation.
Thank you. So that, it's just interesting how he says how this seclusion, when they would go far away from people, that's where they would find that's where they would receive essentially the meditations. Rabbi Yeshua Harwood says in text 6 a little bit more about Hispaidus. Jeff, you want to read for us? Text 6, page 44.
Yes, finding the spirit within. It is recorded in many of the works of the medieval rabbis that seclusion, hibotus, separation from everything mundane, perishut, and devotional clinging, devikut, were practiced by the pious Jews. This is to say that when they were alone, they would empty their minds of all worldly concerns and connect their minds with the master of all existence. The famed Kabbalist, the Arizal,
Arizal.
taught that this practice is far more beneficial for the soul than study, and that every person should practice this seclusion meditation according to their ability, either once a week, once a fortnight, or at least once a month, or at the very least once a month.
So it's interesting how this concept of Hispaidus, of going into seclusion, which is secluding your mind away from everything and being able to focus on something a lot greater, deeper, and more spiritual, is something that was practiced way back for many, many generations. Yet Hispaidus is not something we really see people doing it today. It's obviously just from the little that they're saying here about it, we're talking about a very difficult type of meditation, emptying your mind from everything that fills it. That itself, even before you start the actual meditation, the preparation for the meditation we're talking about here is something that we can't expect from all of us. So in a moment, we're going to switch to the next concept of meditation. But let's first finish off understanding what this mystical meditation is. We read that it's the root of divine inspiration and prophecies, which means that rabbis like the Arizal, who would give blessings or predict futures or say what people should do, whatever, right? The prophecies that they would get, they got it through these methods of meditation. And of course, this was a soul elevation for them, that they were able to become higher and reach a much higher place. The methods of these meditations were never publicly published. It's not open for the public. These were taught from teacher to student, verbally teacher to student, and every teacher gave it to only people that were spiritually fit to understand this type of meditation and not to abuse it. We have recorded stories where it has been abused and it wasn't necessarily a happy ending, like we'll read in a moment. Before we get there, Marcia, would you like to read for us text 7?
Sure. Mystical
Okay.
meanderings.
Thank you.
You may be aware that in the view of many of our great sages, there is a technique for individuals of extremely advanced character to experience the mystical visions of the divine, chariot, the angels in heaven surrounding God's throne as revealed to Ezekiel and others, and to gaze into the spiritual chambers of angels and the like. They would fast for a designated amount of days, then place their head between their knees and whisper copious songs of praise to God with their faces toward the earth. This opened them to mystical visions and allowed them to experience roaming the heavens and exploring its supernatural chambers with clarity. There are two works of Mishnaic sages regarding this, entitled Hey
Chalot
Halot
Rabatai.
Rabbate, the Great Chambers, and Hey Halot
Zutari.
Zukati, the Minor Chambers. This is all very well known and was regarded by all of the sages as authentic. They insisted that God performs miracles and wonders through saintly individuals, tzaddikim, just as he did with the prophets, and that God shows them awesome visions, just as he showed the prophets.
Thank you. So this is just to give you context to this. I should have said this before, but when the Jews from Moses, who was a prophet, when they took the Jews out of Egypt, until after the destruction of the first temple, we had something called prophets. Every generation had one, two, sometimes several prophets that God would communicate through the prophet to the Jewish people. After the destruction of the second temple, we didn't have prophets anymore, but we had spiritual leaders from the era of the first to the second temple. After the destruction of the second temple, we also lost that. They were called Nasiim, a Nasi, like the president of their tribes. The last of them was Mordechai, who the story of Purim is about him, about the story of Mordechai, who saves the Jewish people when Haman wanted to annihilate the Jewish people. So Mordechai was the last one of the Sanhedrin to actually live. So he was there from the destruction of the second temple, and then the story of Purim, he's already an older person. But after the destruction of the second temple, where are the leaders? What type of leaderships do we have? So we have great rabbis, but they're not prophets. They're not fortune tellers. They don't perform magic. They don't communicate between God and the Jewish people. So what role do they play? So we began having something we called the Kabbalists. The Kabbalists were started in the times from Mordechai, who passed on the Kabbalistic teachings from everything that he learned, and he started passing it to his students, who passed it on to the next generation to generation. They passed on the Torah teachings and everything, all the Torah and mitzvahs. Then the Kabbalah, the secrets, were kept at a much closer knit until the Arizal, who actually published books on it. The books weren't open to the public for many, many generations, but eventually it came to what we have today. It's pretty accessible to anyone that's interested. I'm not saying it's understandable, but it's accessible. That being said, what we just read in text 7 is saying that there's this stuff are there. The meditation was out there, and that's how the Kabbalists and the rabbis, the leaders of the generations, were able to receive what we would call a prophecy. It wasn't a prophecy, but it was a sort of communication to God and an intuition that they would have, that they would share with us after such a short meditation, just validating this concept. Now let's talk about a source from the Talmud, because I like to bring different sources so we get a full picture of this concept. Text 8, again, when you study Talmud, you get to see all the colors of the Jewish people. There's no secrets anymore. The Talmud tells us that 4 individuals entered the orchard, the Pardes, and they explored the Torah's mystical secrets. And they called the Torah the spiritual garden. And they are, who's these 4 people? Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. So Ben Azai, the Talmud tells us, gazed at the divine presence and he died instantly. His soul left his body. His soul couldn't handle this great revelation anymore. Ben Zoma, the next sage, gazed at the divine presence and became crazed. Achar, which his name means the other person, because he became a different person, as you'll see in a second. Achar gazed at chopped down the shoots of asplings. In other words, he became a heretic. He gave up his Judaism. He just said this whole thing, I can't handle this anymore. Rabbi Akiva emerged safely. So we have here 4 of the greatest sages of their generation. They all entered the spiritual meditation, spiritual orchard, and 3 out of 4 of them were harmed. Why does the Talmud share this story with us? It's not a very exciting story for us to know. So the Talmud tells us to us because it wants us to know that, hold on a second. The Talmud wants us to know, and the Rebbe actually speaks about this concept. The Talmud wants us to know that even when we're doing something positive, something meditative, something exploring something spiritual, we still have to do it with the right intentions. We have to go into it properly. And the Rebbe says that we're not, God forbid, judging Rabbi Azai or Rabbi Zoma or Acha. We're not judging them, whatever their thing was. But when we go into meditation, it's a very, very sensitive thing. If we're doing this properly, then we'll see positive results. If we do it improperly with the wrong intentions, then we might see other types of results. Now, this being said, this is talking about the first type of meditation, which we said was hisbodedus, which means to seclude oneself for hours, for days, and just go off the grid and really strip yourself, subtract as much mundane and materialistic as possible, and get into a spiritual place. Now, we're going to go into the next topic of starting to discover what this spirituality is. So we spoke, if they would seclude themselves, what would they be doing there? Okay, let's see if we can do what they were doing there while we're still here without secluding ourselves. So this concept is called hisbonenus. Hisbonenut, the word comes from, the root of the word is bina, like chachma, bina, das. Bina means understanding. So we want to start to try to understand spirituality. And this is the main part of tonight's course. We want to help ourselves and teach ourselves, and educate ourselves. How can we understand godliness? This is the word hitbonenut. Means to understand. We want to understand as best as we can. And practice meditation on a concept to deepen your appreciation of it. So we're not looking to seclude ourselves from other stuff, but rather hyper focus on this thing. And the more I can focus on it, the more I'll understand it. So we have a lot of things to explore. We have different topics here. In your pages, you have on page 48, figure 2.1. You see here the differences between hisbodedus and hisbonenus. You see how hitbodedus, the first one, is where a person is alone and secluded. Hitbonenus is where it's contemplation. Very big difference. Contemplation, we can contemplate things together. We can do this jointly, but you can't be in seclusion together with other people, right? Another way of trying to understand the difference between these two concepts. Hitbodedus, if you look at the image on the screen, you're trying to disengage the orange, the peel from the orange, trying to separate them, that they should have nothing to do with each other. They should have recognized that one is the peel and one is the orange. One is the body and one is the soul. One is the spirituality and one is the mundane. Hitbonenus is the opposite. It's hyper engagement with the soul. So we're not trying to separate the body from the soul anymore. We're rather trying to fuse them both together and adding spirituality to it, adding the soul with the body. And remember, God created us as a soul in a body. He didn't create us as soul creatures, just a soul. So our life goal and mission is to figure out how we can fuse the soul in the body and do this in a proper way. So this is what we want to figure out now. So look in page 9. Page 9, we have here from a letter that the previous Rebbe wrote, text number 9. He writes, a central foundation of the study of mysticism is to repeatedly spend considerable time in deep contemplation on the subject matter being studied. This is the practice that is referred to as hitbonenut, which means to firmly visualize the concept and to analyze it deeply. So this is, the Rebbe is just writing here of what this is. And this could be on every single topic that we learn. This could be with the Torah portion, and this could be with politics. With politics, everyone knows how to analyze. We don't need a class for that. But a Torah portion, when we analyze this, we want to understand, how can I apply this to my life? Why is this important for me today? So in this week's Torah portion, we're discussing what they did in the Mishkan and the tabernacle. Why is this important? What are the details? What can I learn from the details, right? On the screen, we have the verse, that you shall take it to heart. Text 10 will describe how Rabbeinu Bachya teaches what it means that you have to take this to heart. Jonathan, you want to read first text 10 on page 50?
Take it to heart, Rabachia ben Asher. You shall take it to heart. This is a positive commandment to know God. We are enjoined to investigate and develop an appreciation of God's unity and not rely solely on received tradition. However, since spiritual understanding of the divine is abstract and not easily understood, the verse emphasizes that we must take it to heart. The Hebrew term for take it in this verse more literally means to return it, indicating that we must repeatedly contemplate the concept until it settles in our mind. The term take to heart always refers to a matter that requires profound concentration and extra focused thinking. But it says you shall take it to heart. What is the it?
What's it? It changes every day. Depends what you're learning.
You shall take it to heart. What should you take to heart?
Whatever you want.
God or the mitzvahs or the Torah?
He says, indicating that we must repeatedly contemplate the concept until it settles in our mind. The term take it,
return it.
Return it, but you have to always be doing it. You don't do it one time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to constantly be doing it. And 1 week it could be one concept, and the next week it could be something else.
I guess this is to know God. That's what it says.
Right.
Contemplate knowing God.
Right. So this is, you have to contemplate it, meditate on it, and try to figure it out. And sometimes it's going to be through your work. Sometimes it'll be through your children. Sometimes it'll be through a person got sick and got better, and they contemplate the concept. Right. So you take it to God. You take it to heart. You always have to contemplate what's in front of you and take that to heart and figure out where God is in that picture and bring it home. That's where we see from the Torah, the verse, how important it is for us to have this ongoing meditative focus on figuring out where is the spirituality in my life. Now, this is obviously not things that are easy to do. So we have a few texts that will help us, give us ideas of what to think about, things we can delve onto, and concept to really meditate on that will help us understand that. So text 11a is from the previous Rebbe, again. Before was from one of his letters he wrote. This is from one of his discourses that he wrote. So 11a. Marilyn, you want to read first?
Sure. Kipuna is an internal dialogue with an idea. Once we have studied something well in all its fine details, explanations, and commentaries, until we have developed a thorough understanding of it, The practice of Hitbunat meditation is to then mentally analyze the idea to verify whether our understanding is true and accurate in all its details. Through diligent meditation, we develop a strong visualization of the soul of the concept, which is the animating core of the idea itself.
So we taking that concept and we keep thinking it and rethinking it from one angle, from another angle, thoroughly, and having this dialogue back and forth, and almost like putting it through the grinder and putting it back together until we have this real thorough thought right there in front of us. So to explain this a little better, with text 11b, expanding awareness, the Hasidic practice of Hitbonenus meditation involves actively contemplating a spiritual concept until it expands our creative intelligence. It deepens our awareness and becomes indelible part of our consciousness. So he's explaining what the previous Rebbe is writing, that it's not just a meditative form where when we're done, we go back to our regular day at work, but rather we start thinking differently. We start seeing the world with a different pair of eyes. We actually became a different person. We became much more aware of the things that are around us. And we can't emphasize enough the concept of meditation in Judaism, the concept of avodat halev, the service of our heart. What does that mean, the service of our heart? Is that we have to work on our heart, work on ourselves to be a better person. So after we took an hour to think about the greatness of God and how God creates everything, then we go outside and we see our neighbor and we despise them. And then we tell ourselves, 1 second, I just wasted a whole hour in thinking of a greater conscious, of a greater awareness. What the Rebbe is saying here is that we have to concentrate on this until when we see our neighbor, instead of giving them a dirty look, we give them a friendly look. In other words, until we walk in the streets and everything we see is this godly awareness. This is the ultimate where we want to be. Let's look at text 12. This comes from a writings of the Rebbe Rashab, the father of the previous Rebbe, and he says, text 12, through honest contemplation with deep focus, a person's soul develops an authentic closeness and attachment with God's commensurate to their spiritual standing. Through this, one fulfills the mitzvah to love God. Again, how do we, Marcia mentioned before, through love. How do we create this love through God? It's through our meditating on this. The more we meditate, the more we develop this friendship, this closeness, right? Imagine if before we show up to a meeting, we prepared ourselves, we rehearsed ourselves. What am I going to say? How am I going to present my presentation at the meeting? We're prepared. We're excited about this. Sometimes our feelings are nervous, but we've already created for ourselves a feeling towards what we're about to do. The same is with God. If we just start to pray, where's the love? Where's the feelings? Where's the interest? But if we prepare ourselves in these meditative things, that helps us a lot. So I want to move on to the next text, which is rather long, but very, very interesting, where the Rebbe Rashab, the same Rebbe we just read in text 12, in text 13, he gives us his understanding and his way to truly allow us to meditate properly. So we'll read this, and then we'll go through it on the screen to help us understand it. Marcia, you want to read for us? You can divide it with Jeffrey.
Yeah, she's not here right now.
Okay,
We-
you
we
go
prob-
for it.
Okay, we may have to go, in a little bit.
Okay,
So the,
I didn't realize we're going over time. Yeah, go for it.
the following is a Hibabana exercise. It begins by analyzing a spiritual teaching to reach an awareness of the spiritual energy that breathes within everything. That energy is the force responsible for each entity's continued existence and is its innermost identity. This meditation develops our spiritual awareness and reframes our perspective of the world, the soul existence. Want me to keep going here?
Yeah,
Everything that exists is comprised of a physical form and a spiritual divine energy that creates and animates the entity's physical existence. This is clearly demonstrable in animals and humans. They have an animating spirit. If the spirit were to leave their body, the body would no longer be classified as alive, and the body would begin to decompose and turn to dust. That is because the very existence of the body hinges upon the spiritual energy that animates it. The same is true of vegetation. It also possesses an animating spirit. Even inanimate objects possess some sort of energizing spirit that keeps them in existence and prevents their disappearance. Based on this awareness, spirituality is referred to as good and life because it is a living force that remains alive and exists forever and in existence forever. Whereas physical matter is referred to as negative and death because it decomposes and ceases to exist without the spirit within it. And it has no means of existing independently. I have to take a call. I'm so sorry.
okay, I'll take you over.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. The Rebbe Rashab continues here that from my flesh I can perceive God. This is what Job says, meaning that human experience informs our understanding of God. We intuitively sense that we have a life force that provides us with our life, and that it is our primary identity, and that were our soul to leave our body, the body would be left like an inanimate rock and eventually decompose and disappear. The same is true with all that exists. The entire cosmos and all its contents exist due to a divine spirit that gives existence to everything. That divine light and force is the entire life and sustaining power of all that exists. If it departs, all existence will revert to absolute nothingness. If we meditate on this idea, the Rebbe Rashab continues, we will realize that the material existence of each entity is entirely dependent on the spiritual force within it, and that physicality is nullified before the presence of the divine light that is its source of existence. This realization will inspire a powerful desire, a love and yearning for the divine. We will no longer desire that which exists only superficially and which is in fact death, decomposing, and disappearing. All we will desire is to attach to divinity that is true life and mainstay of existence. This is extremely powerful. I think this is something we can read over and over and over until we knock this into our head. Let's just go through this on the screen. So just help us understand here. The Rebbe Rashab is writing that everything in this world, every single object has a soul. That's the first thing we have to understand. The soul is the source of life. Without a soul, it's death. We must have a soul. Everything has to have a soul. And spirituality should be valued as the most important thing in this world, because if we don't have it, then we're looking at death, right? Because, like we said, if the soul leaves the body, then the body just decomposes, nothing left to it. Same too as everything that's materialistic, it will eventually disappear if it's missing its soul. Finding the purpose in everything that's mundane, everything in our life. Everything in life needs to have purpose. If it doesn't have purpose, then essentially it's considered death. We're looking at something that's decomposing. If we turn to page 56, there's an exercise, 2.4. This is just a very interesting exercise. We'll do this together. It says, identify the body and soul of the following scenarios, just to help us understand that we're on the page here where we know what's body and what's soul, what's mundane and what's spiritual. Dinner with a spouse or a close friend. So in this scenario, the body is the food, the dinner itself, and the soul is the relationship that we're having with the other person. Disciplining a child. Again, the discipline itself, the being mean or strict to the child, is the body. It's not important. That's going to disappear. But shaping this child to be
I'm
a
back.
proper human being is the soul.
Oh, I'm back here for a
Good,
second.
good. On page 56, we're looking at the exercise 2.4.
Thank you.
Exercising at the gym. The exercise itself is the body, and the spiritual part of exercising would be that we're taking care of our body. We're making our body a healthy body. And shaking hands on a deal is another interesting scenario. The body would be the actual handshake. The meaning behind the handshake would be the soul, which means that we're committed to one another. This friendship is real. This contract is serious. My word is my word, right? This is very, very real. I'm going to put another exercise on the screen to help us just understand for a moment what the Rebbe Rashab is describing to us. So we have on the screen here an image. If I would ask you what's this image, you'd say it's a father and a mother, 4 children on Hanukkah, lighting the Hanukkah menorah. Beautiful painting. The body of this painting is the canvas, the ink, all the different brushes that was used to make this picture. The spiritual part of this is the picture, is the image itself. But you'll never walk into a museum of art or look at a piece of art anywhere and say to someone, wow, this is a nice piece of canvas with some paint on it. We never look at it like that. We don't look at the body of it. We look at the spiritual, the picture that we see, right? The image that it's portraying. Our screens that we're looking at now is filled with thousands of little tiny dots of light. But all those dots of light are put together and the colors are the way it is. It gives us the images and the words on the screen that we're able to read it. But we never say, wow, there's so many dots on the screen. Why do I need so many? Or right? We say, no, it's an image. It's one big picture. We look at the full picture. So the Rebbe Rashab is trying to teach us here. And we walk in the street and we see a body and a soul. We shouldn't see the body for the canvas and the ink and the paint and the brush, but we should see them as the art. We should see them as the picture, as the soul that's in the body. When we become God aware and spiritual aware, our awareness travels to everywhere we see things. Instead of looking at the world as just a physical world, we start seeing it as a spiritual world. It's the same world, nothing changed. Exactly the same world, just the way we are perceiving it becomes very different. And this is not anything new. If you look at text 14 on page 57, it says, this day I call upon heaven and earth as witnesses that I have warned you. I've set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. You shall choose life, so that you and your offsprings will live. Moses tells us to the Jewish people the last day of his life. Why is he telling them to choose death or to choose life? Do we know anyone that has the option and they would not choose life? Rather, the understanding of what Moses is telling them here is choose to see the life in everything. Like we mentioned before, the Rebbe Rashab spoke in that long text. What is life? Spirituality. Because if it's not spiritual, if it's not soul-oriented, if it doesn't have a purpose, then it's going to just disintegrate. Then there's nothing to it. There's nothing behind it. So choose life means choose to be aware of the godliness and spirituality that's around you. Choose to see the positivity in everything. Choose to recognize that when you're taking a certain route and you're walking down a certain street, you come across another person, or there's an opportunity for you to do a mitzvah, to help somebody, whatever it may be, recognize that this is spiritual, this is God aware. God being a godly aware individual will open up your eyes to see the world as a beautiful picture and a beautiful place where God belongs. And that's what we call choosing life. Let's look at text 5 here. Jonathan, you want to read first text 5? The Rebbe Rashab. Loving life.
Choosing life, loving life, loving life. Text 15, you mean?
Text 15. So yeah, page 58, text 15.
The Torah instructs us, love the Lord your God because he is your life. When we love ourselves, it is a state of life that our soul provides that we love, because we sense that it is our core self. By the same token, we should love God, for he is the source of life for all existence. When we meditate on the reality that divinity is the life of all life, we will desire and love God. Consequently, in all our interactions with the externality of the universe, such as eating or drinking, conducting business, and so on, our focus will shift from the material and corporeal elements to embrace the divinity within them.
Thank you. So the more we choose life, the more we focus on this, which, by the way, being here for this time and taking this class helps us think more of like that. We start seeing more spirituality and less of the mundane, less of the physical. Look at the screen here for a moment. We have here, spirituality isn't out there somewhere. We can't go and think we can travel somewhere to the mountains and we'll find spirituality there, but rather spirituality starts within. It's in the inner soul of everything and everywhere. If we just look inside, we will find everything that we've been ever looking for. We'll find it right there. Too often we think that the grass is greener on the other side, but when we start looking at life in this more spiritual way, we will recognize that it actually, we have the greatest gift of life right here sitting in front of us.
That runs contrary to what it said at the earlier about the Herodot, going off and being removed from everything, and only through that way can you have a greater understanding.
It's a very good point. So the concept of hisbodedus is, where we spoke about seclusion, is the person is not secluding themselves away. They're including themselves in the seclusion. In other words, they're taking themselves with them out there in the field.
Right.
And what we're saying here is perhaps there are some forms of modern meditation which tries to say, leave yourself, be someone else for a few moments, enjoy this, whatever, and then you go back home and you have to meet yourself again,
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
yeah, the concept of secluding is secluding yourself from the distractions, but you're very focused on who you are and you're part of this journey. And that's what the message here on the screen is, that it's the inner soul of everything everywhere, that you can't run away from yourself. You cannot seclude yourself from yourself. You are you. Your soul is in your body, and that's the way it is.
Right.
Yeah. And this, of course, is something we must practice regularly. The more we think about and contemplate on these ideas, we will start seeing the change in our life, which is a very important thing. I do want to say that on page 60, there is a lot of interesting things where you'll see put together here, research and mental health that helps us when we work on ourselves in these fields that we're talking about here. We'll see a lot of change in our life in different areas. I will also mention that there's a lot more in the appendix in this class of the Hitbodedus, the seclusion and the meditation concepts and Jewish backgrounds. So I'm just going to play a quick review of this course, and then we will open it up for discussion.
Lesson 2. Mind yourself. Reflecting inward to find the divine. 1. We are comprised of a body and soul, each of which has a unique character and drive. 2. The body is driven by material gain, and the soul by spirituality. We all possess an innate spiritual drive within us that we can come to feel and experience. 3. One way to perceive the spiritual drive of the soul is by distancing ourselves from the immediate distractions of materialism. This is the root of Hitbodedut meditation. 4. The most effective way to develop our spiritual calling is by learning about it and contemplating the spiritual ideas. This meditation practice is known as Hitbonenut. 5. Just as we have a soul that gives us life and our true identity, the world has a soul that sustains it and is its most authentic identity. 6. We choose life by focusing on the spiritual content of every experience and valuing the divine potential within it.
Very good. This week conclude the second class. Next week, we will be talking about how spirituality is not as far as it seems. It's really close by, and we can touch it with our hands. We can reach it. And stop this recording here.